What if I told you that the very core of your personality, like the way you argue, the way you shut down, or just the way you choose to interact with the world around you, was entirely locked in before you even had a fully formed brain?
I mean, it completely shatters the foundational assumptions we hold about human development, right?
Right, exactly. Because what if your deepest behavioral traits weren't just, simply the result of random genetic coding? What if they were actually a calculated, deliberate survival strategy that you drafted when you were, like, barely the size of a grape?
It's wild to think about. It suggests that from the very beginning, we aren't just biological material passively growing. We are actually conscious architects of our own defense mechanisms.
That is exactly what we are exploring today.
Right.
We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly specific, deeply classical, and, highly alternative medical framework regarding the origins, diagnosis, and treatment of autism.
Yeah, and this is so different from what we usually see. Because, modern Western medicine, it usually looks for genetic markers, right?
Yes.
Or neurological pathways and behavioral criteria.
Oh, absolutely. It basically treats development as this biological unfolding.
Right. But the source material we have in front of us today, it just throws all of that entirely out the window. We are stepping into a paradigm that operates on, well, an entirely different universe of logic.
We really are. And the sources we are working from today, they include transcripts from these detailed lectures on classical medicine and what this framework actually terms fetal disease.
Yeah, and what makes these texts so fascinating is just how they synthesize concepts that, well, they seem worlds apart to the modern ear.
For sure, they take these modern-sounding ideas like
Mm.
DNA sequencing and behavioral patterns, and they just inextricably link them to complex family dynamics.
And traditional gender roles, too. Plus, ancient Buddhist cosmology, it really is a complete merging of biology and spirituality.
It is. But hey, before we get into the weeds of this, I want to set a really clear ground rule for you listening. Our mission today is to completely map out how this specific philosophical system explains the origins of autism.
Exactly. We are going to impartially unpack the fascinating ideas, the internal logic, and just the overall worldview of these specific texts.
Right. We are treating this as a window into a totally different way of thinking. We're absolutely not taking sides here, and we're certainly not endorsing these medical claims or, presenting them as scientific fact.
Which is a really crucial posture to take, honestly, because the claims made in these texts are incredibly provocative.
Oh, highly provocative.
They challenge the very bedrock of Western clinical psychology. They are completely redefining what autism is, when it begins, and who is ultimately responsible for its development.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to even begin to understand this framework, we have to completely redefine our timeline of human development.
We do.
According to these sources, autism isn't categorized as some genetic error or like a postnatal developmental delay. It is strictly categorized as a typing.
Yes, tybing, which translates roughly to a fetal disease.
Fetal disease.
Right. And the fundamental premise of this entire philosophical architecture is that the foundation of a child's personality, their thought processes, and specifically their communication models, they are not developed during early childhood socialization.
So they aren't learning this stuff on the playground.
Exactly. They aren't learning it from watching their parents speak after they're born. They are established in the womb.
Wow.
And crucially, not just generally in the womb, but specifically in this hyper-condensed window, like between months 1 and 3 of pregnancy.
Months 1 to 3. That timeline is just staggering.
It really is early.
In a modern context, most people barely even know they're pregnant during that first trimester.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. The fetus is incredibly tiny. The brain is just beginning to form its most basic structures. So how does this framework explain complex personality development happening at a stage when there's barely a functioning nervous system?
Well, this is where we have to understand the text's classical explanation of DNA.
Okay, how so?
Because in this paradigm, DNA sequencing isn't viewed merely as a biological process. It's not just the building of arms, legs, organs, and tissue.
Right.
It is fundamentally viewed as behavioral sequencing. And the text utilizes the classical concepts of yin and yang to explain the mechanics of this.
Okay, and for those who might only know yin and yang as like a symbol on a t-shirt or a necklace, what does the yang spirit actually do in this specific context?
Good question. So, in classical philosophy, yang represents action, right? It's movement, dynamic energy, the drafting of new things.
Active energy. Got it.
So, during the third month of pregnancy, this text states that the yang spirit becomes highly active.
And what is it actively doing?
It is actively moving and arranging the cognitive patterns of the fetus. It's this period of intense dynamic drafting. The fetus is energetically testing out communication models and behavioral responses.
It's fluid.
Exactly. It is highly fluid.
It's almost like, okay, think of fetal development like setting up a brand new smartphone right out of the box.
So I like that.
Right. Those first 3 months, the baby is deep in the settings menu. They are actively choosing their default behavioral responses, their notification settings, how they're going to connect to the network.
That's a great way to put it.
They're essentially drafting the operating system.
That is an incredibly apt analogy because it captures the active nature of the process. The fetus is making choices.
Right.
But that drafting phase doesn't last forever. The text explains that by the 4th month, that dynamic yang energy recedes and the yin spirit takes over.
And yin is like the opposite of yang, right? It's the grounding force.
Precisely. Yin represents stillness, solidity, weight, and resting energy.
Okay, so what is its job?
The yin spirit's job is to take all those behavioral patterns that were dynamically drafted in the 3rd month and fix them permanently into place.
Oh, wow. It locks them down.
It solidifies the emotional and cognitive models entirely. The text actually refers to classical writings to point out that once the yin spirit acts, the mold is cast.
So to use the analogy, month 4 is when the fetus save.
Yes,
And the operating system is locked in, just hardwired into the energetic blueprint of the child.
exactly. But hold on, if the fetus is actively choosing its settings in those first 3 months, what is it basing those choices on?
Yeah, that's the big question. Because a smartphone chooses its settings based on the Wi-Fi environment it detects.
Right.
So if we view early-stage fetuses not as these, passive biological passengers, but as conscious participants, what exactly are they observing? I mean, they don't have functioning eyes or ears yet.
Well, they don't have physical ears to hear sound waves, no. But according to this classical logic, they have absolute energetic awareness.
Energetic awareness.
Yes. The fetus is completely synchronized with the mother's energetic field, her chi.
Herkai. Okay.
The text argues that the fetus is highly sensitive to the emotional and psychological frequency of the mother. And it is this specific observation of the mother's state that leads directly to the development of autism.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of the disorder within this text. And the source is incredibly specific about what autism actually is here.
Very specific.
And it diverges completely from the clinical spectrum we are familiar with today. It introduces a concept that I actually find deeply haunting.
The silence strategy.
The silence strategy, yes.
Yeah, the text defines true autism not as a collection of developmental delays, but as a very specific, deliberate, and singular action taken by the fetus.
And that action is closing the heart door inward.
Closing the heart door, exactly.
Let's explore what that actually looks like behaviorally.
Right.
Like, what does closing the heart door mean in practice?
According to the source, a child with true autism refuses to interact not because they lack the cognitive ability, but because their heart door is deliberately locked from the inside.
Deliberately locked.
Yes. They won't look at the mother when she speaks, they won't make eye contact with others, and they remain completely undisturbed by the chaos of their surrounding environment.
Like they're in a bubble.
Basically, they have built this impenetrable, energetic fortress around themselves.
And the text claims this isn't random at all. It claims this specific lockdown choice is a direct reaction to the mother's personality during that critical 1 to 3 month window of the settings menu.
That's right.
So what exactly is the mother doing that triggers such an extreme defense mechanism?
The source does not mince words here. It claims the silent strategy is triggered exclusively if the mother is highly dominant, fierce, or holds the absolute speaking power in the family dynamic.
So if she monopolizes the dialogue.
Exactly. If she dominates the emotional space and projects an overwhelming authoritative energy.
I mean, I really have to push back on this because the implications are enormous here.
They are.
The text is essentially claiming that a fetus-like, a tiny cluster of developing cells weeks into a pregnancy, is engaging in complex game theory.
Right.
It's supposedly sensing a dominant mother, calculating that it will never win an argument against her, and then adopting a lifelong strategy of absolute silence just to avoid the conflict?
I know. It sounds...
I mean, that requires a level of psychological sophistication that just feels impossible to attribute to an embryo. how does the text possibly justify this internally?
Well, it justifies it by completely removing cognitive thought from the equation and replacing it with energetic frequency.
Okay, explain that.
We have to stop thinking of the fetus as an adult brain making rational calculations in English, right?
Right.
The psychological logic of the text relies entirely on synchronization. The fetus shares the mother's blood, her life force, her ki. They are essentially the exact same energetic organism at that stage.
So it's less like a tiny adult thinking, oh, I better stay quiet, and more like a tuning fork vibrating against a massive bell.
That is the exact mechanism. Perfect way to describe it.
Okay.
When the fetus is in that active yang stage in month 3, trying to set its communication sequence, it hits this huge wall of dominant, fierce energy from the mother.
The mother's frequency is just controlling all the space.
Yes. And the energetic reaction of the fetus, like its instinctive internal monologue, as the text frames it, is basically, you are too strong, you control all the dialogue, there is no room for my energy here.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, I will close my mouth, I will shut my heart door, and I will simply let you talk.
It is a pure defense mechanism.
Completely, and that is the radical paradigm shift of this text. The baby's silence is viewed not as a deficit, not as a broken neurological pathway, but as a highly successful, deliberate coping mechanism.
A perfectly executed defense strategy.
Exactly. It's drafted to survive a specific, overwhelming, energetic environment. The fetus realizes the only way to exist peacefully in a space completely monopolized by the mother is to just opt out of the conversation permanently.
I mean, the idea that neurodivergence is actually a brilliantly executed prenatal survival strategy is just a profound reframing.
It really is.
But this theory of a behavioral coping mechanism, it doesn't stop there. The text takes this concept and uses it to explain one of the most well-known, statistically verified mysteries about autism.
Right, the massive gender gap.
Yes, and this is where the source material gets highly provocative in how it views demographics.
Yeah.
Because the texts point out that autism is vastly more common in males.
Vastly more common.
They cite statistics showing an 8-to-1 ratio of males to females in places like the UK and Taiwan.
Yeah, and modern science universally acknowledges this disparity, though the exact reasons are still, fiercely debated in clinical circles.
Right. If you read modern research, the prevalent theory for the gender gap is diagnostic bias.
The masking theory.
Yep. Exactly. Western experts often argue that females simply mask their autism better.
Right.
The theory is that society conditions young girls to mimic social cues more effectively. So they learn to fake eye contact, they force social interactions, and that allows them to basically fly under the radar of diagnostic criteria.
Basically, the theory is girls have it just as often, they're just hiding it.
Right. And our source text today aggressively, unequivocally rejects that entire premise.
It does. It calls the masking theory a baseless guess from Western experts who don't understand the energetic roots of the condition.
So if it completely dismisses masking, how does this classical framework actually explain why boys get diagnosed at an 8-to-1 ratio?
Here's where it gets really interesting. It explains the prevalence by mapping adult traditional male and female social behaviors backward onto the developing fetus.
Wait, backward.
Yeah. The underlying philosophy here is that adult gendered communication styles aren't just socially conditioned over a lifetime. They exist perfectly formed and ready to be deployed in the embryonic stage.
So this text leans incredibly heavily into traditional gender tropes regarding conflict resolution.
Extremely heavily, yes.
It essentially asks the reader to observe how adult men and adult women typically respond when confronted with a fierce, dominant woman in an argument.
Exactly. According to the behavioral models presented in the source, when an adult man is faced with a highly dominant, fiercely argumentative wife or mother, his traditional, natural response is to withdraw.
He shuts down.
He shuts down. He might walk out of the room, go out for a drink, slam the door, or simply sit in silence and completely ignore her. His instinct is to disengage and build a wall.
The classic stonewalling defense.
Yes. But in contrast, the text argues that women, when faced with a dominant female figure, possess a different natural instinct.
What's their instinct?
They are far more likely to engage, to argue back, to try and assert their own voice against the dominance. They keep their communication channels open, even if the communication is combative.
So the source takes these deeply traditional adult stereotypes, like the stoic withdrawing man and the verbally engaging woman, and applies them directly to the 3-month-old fetus in the womb.
It does.
It claims that during that critical settings menu window, when the fetus senses this wall of maternal dominance, a female fetus will default to the traditional female response.
Right.
Her energetic instinct is, I'm going to argue with you. Therefore, her heart door remains open, her communication settings stay active.
But a male fetus, sensing that exact same dominant maternal energy, defaults to the traditional male response. His energetic instinct is, I'm going to withdraw, I'm going to shut down, close my heart door, and ignore you.
And because that male response to dominance, the absolute withdrawal, the silence, the utter lack of interaction, because that perfectly mirrors the exact symptoms of what we define as autism, the text argues that the autism setting is triggered exponentially more often in boys.
That is the logical through line of the text, yes. It views DNA as a rigid recording of male versus female conflict resolution styles. It's a complete inversion of how we usually debate nature versus nurture.
It twisted into a pretzel. I mean, it's arguing that the inherent male instinct to withdraw from conflict, is explicitly triggered by the nurture, the mother's dominant energetic environment in the womb.
Right.
And that combination is what creates a permanent biological and behavioral lock.
It is a seamless synthesis of biology, psychology, and classical social roles, all playing out at a microscopic, energetic level.
But this raises an enormous logical problem.
What's that?
Think about how many fierce, dominant, strong-willed mothers exist in the world.
Oh, millions.
Millions. So if all this condition requires is a dominant mother and the natural male instinct to withdraw, wouldn't autism be incredibly common?
You'd think so.
Right. Would every single male fetus with a strong-willed mother automatically lock their heart door?
It's the obvious question, and the sources actually anticipate it. They address it directly, and their answer introduces a completely unexpected, highly specific requirement for this silent strategy to actually take root.
Okay, what is it?
It's not just about the mother's personality and the baby's gender. There is a socioeconomic requirement.
Yes, the wealth connection. The text makes an absolutely striking claim here, one that feels very, very controversial.
It does.
It asserts that true autism almost exclusively occurs in families with good financial standing, like in wealthy, or at the very least, comfortable, highly respectable families.
And to explain the mechanics of why wealth plays a role in fetal psychology, the sources pull heavily from ancient spiritual philosophy. They specifically reference a major foundational Buddhist text called the Yogacara Bhumi Sastra.
Okay, let's slow down and really look at this, because the text uses very vivid, specific imagery to make this point. How does a Buddhist text about consciousness explain a link between socioeconomics and autism?
So, the Yogacara Bhumi Sastra is used in this context to break down a fundamental dichotomy of fetuses based on their accumulated fortune or merit.
Fortune or merit.
Yes. It explores how the external material reality of the family translates into the internal psychological reality of the womb.
So the womb environment as a reflection of the bank account.
In a sense, yeah. The classical text describes the experience of a fetus with little fortune, meaning a child destined to be born into a poor, struggling family.
Okay.
According to this framework, a fetus in a poverty-stricken family experiences the womb as a highly chaotic, anxiety-ridden place. They are energetically absorbing the mother's constant fear.
And the text provides a fascinating internal visualization for this, right?
It does. It says the fetus perceives themselves as frantically rushing through a dense, chaotic bamboo forest, basically pushing through sharp reeds.
Rushing through a bamboo forest.
Right.
That is such a visceral metaphor for panic.
It perfectly encapsulates pure survival mode. The mother is stressed about daily survival, like how to pay rent, where the next meal is coming from. She is in a state of high alert panic.
And because the fetus shares her Kai, the fetus feels that exact same frantic, desperate energy.
Exactly. The fetus is just trying to hack its way through the bamboo, trying to survive the turbulence of the pregnancy.
And how does this frantic state prevent autism?
Well, the text argues that in a state of constant energetic panic, the fetus has absolutely no time to think.
No time to think.
Right. They have no mental space to calmly strategize. Drafting a complex behavioral model like the silent strategy, like literally deciding to close your heart door and block out the world, that takes profound focus.
So they're too distracted.
A fetus in a chaotic, poor womb is too busy simply trying to exist to formulate a psychological defense mechanism.
Wait, let me make sure I'm understanding the implication of this text correctly.
Okay.
Are you saying that according to this philosophy, it actually requires privilege to develop autism?
That is precisely the core argument of this section. The text contrasts the frantic bamboo forest with the experience of a fetus who possesses good fortune.
Good fortune.
Yes, meaning a fetus gestating in a wealthy, financially stable, respectable family. This fetus experiences the womb entirely differently. They experience it as a vast, calm, spacious palace.
A palace versus a bamboo forest.
Yes. In the palace, they hear beautiful, quiet sounds. The mother is not panicked about basic survival. The external environment is secure, so the internal energetic environment is incredibly peaceful.
So because the mother isn't radiating financial panic, the Wi-Fi signal is crystal clear.
Exactly. And because the environment is calm, the fetus has something the poor fetus completely lacks: the luxury of time.
The luxury of time.
They have the quiet, uninterrupted mental bandwidth required to calmly observe the mother's dominant personality. Because they aren't fighting for their life, they can actively, meticulously strategize their response.
Wow.
They have the peace required to say, okay, you are dominant. I have the time to build a wall and lock my heart door.
That is, wow. It completely reframes a neurological condition as a psychological luxury.
It really does.
It's basically saying that only a mind at peace has the bandwidth to decide to shut the world out. The chaotic mind is too busy just trying to survive the day. I mean, it's an incredibly poetic, albeit deeply controversial way of explaining demographic data regarding diagnosis rates in different socioeconomic brackets.
It is the ultimate example of how this classical framework operates. It takes observable phenomena like the perception that autism diagnoses might be higher in affluent areas, and instead of looking for logical modern explanations like access to better health care, better diagnostic tools, or environmental factors.
This looks for spiritual and energetic causality.
Exactly. The why is always rooted in the metaphysical, psychological experience of the fetus.
Okay, so we've mapped out the intricate origins according to this philosophy. We need the dominant mother monopolizing the space. We need the natural male coping mechanism of withdrawal.
Yeah.
And we need the quiet, wealthy womb that allows the fetus the luxury of time to lock this strategy in during the first trimester.
That's the formula.
But how do practitioners of this classical system actually use this information? Like, if a parent brings a nonverbal child to them, how do they identify and treat it in the real world?
Well, this brings us to a very critical, highly protective warning within the source texts.
Oh, a warning.
Yes. The authors strongly warn that modern Western medicine constantly misdiagnoses physical brain damage as autism.
Really?
They argue that Western doctors lazily lump entirely different conditions together simply because the surface-level symptoms, like a child not speaking, look similar to the untrained eye.
Right. The text makes a massive distinction between what it calls true autism, which is that psychological choice to close the heart door, and fake autism.
Yes.
And to tell the difference, the source offers a diagnostic test. And it's not a battery of psychological evaluations or a brain scan.
No.
It's a 1-second diagnosis.
The 1-second test. To differentiate true autism from fake autism, the practitioner simply asks the child to stick out their tongue.
Stick out their tongue. That's the entire diagnostic criteria.
That is the physical indicator. But we have to break down the mechanics of why this test supposedly works according to the text's understanding of anatomy and energy.
Okay, break it down for us.
First, let's look at what happens if it's fake autism. The practitioner asks the child to stick out their tongue. If the child physically cannot do it or struggles significantly, moving it stiffly or uncontrollably,
Then what?
the text categorizes this instantly as a physical issue. It compares it to a form of epilepsy or nerve damage.
And if it's not genetic, where does this physical nerve damage come from?
It still goes back to the womb, but it happens at a completely different time and via a completely different mechanism than true autism.
Okay.
The text explains that this physical damage happens much later in the pregnancy, specifically around months 7 or 8.
So we are way past the settings menu phase. The operating system's already locked in?
Exactly. This is late-stage development. The text claims that if the mother experiences extreme, explosive anger during these final months, it triggers a violent, energetic reaction.
A violent reaction.
Yes. Because in classical medicine, extreme anger causes your life energy to violently rush upward toward your head.
So the mother gets furious, and her energy spikes upward like a geyser.
Yes. And we have to remember the core law of this framework. The fetus shares the mother's gay. They are on the exact same energetic circuit.
Right.
So when the mother's energy violently rushes to her head, the baby's energy is forced to violently rush to its head as well.
Oh, man.
The text claims this massive, unnatural surge of late-stage anger energy physically burns out or damages the baby's language center in the brain.
Oh, I see. So it's an energetic injury that causes a tangible physical impairment.
Precisely. The language center and the nerves controlling the tongue are physically damaged by the mother's anger spike.
That's intense.
It is. These children, the text argues, desperately want to interact. They want to communicate. Their heart doors are wide open, but they physically cannot articulate speech because the hardware was fried.
And this is why their tongue mobility is compromised.
Exactly. They get misdiagnosed as autistic by Western doctors because they don't talk, but their internal psychological state is the exact opposite of true autism.
Okay, that explains the physical injury. But what about the child who passes the test? What about the child who can easily stick out their tongue?
Well, if the child can easily and smoothly stick out their tongue, it proves their physical language center and neural pathways are perfectly fine.
The hardware works flawlessly.
Flawlessly. But if that child with perfect hardware still refuses to look at you, refuses to speak, refuses to acknowledge their environment, and remains completely locked inward,
That confirms it is true autism.
it proves the silence isn't a physical inability.
Because it proves that the inability to speak isn't damage from late pregnancy anger. It is the deliberate, calculated psychological choice made back in the first trimester.
Exactly. The hardware is fine, but the software was intentionally programmed for silence.
So what does this all mean for treatment? Like, if a practitioner uses this tongue test and determines it is true autism, confirming that the child's silence is a behavioral choice rooted entirely in the mother's overwhelming dominance during the first trimester, how do they fix it? I'm going to guess they don't send the child to standard occupational or speech therapy.
Absolutely not. Standard therapies are viewed as completely useless in this paradigm because they focus on the wrong target.
Right.
They are treating the symptom, not the source. In this framework, if the child's behavior is simply a sustained reaction to the mother's energetic dominance, then the treatment must focus entirely 100% on the mother.
Wow.
The child isn't broken, the child is just reacting.
That is a staggering paradigm shift for a family to hear.
Mm.
I mean, you are essentially bringing your child to a doctor, and the doctor looks at the mother and says, your child is perfectly fine. Your child is just defending themselves against you. You are the patient here.
Yeah.
The amount of guilt and responsibility that places on the mother is immense.
It is an incredibly intense, heavy remedy, and the text openly acknowledges how devastating this is for a mother to hear.
I can't even imagine.
The prescribed treatment actually requires a profound spiritual, psychological, and ego breakdown of the mother. She has to realize that she has, energetically speaking, reversed the cosmic order of her family.
The cosmic order. I mean, that sounds incredibly abstract. How does the text define the cosmic order of a family?
To explain this, the text quotes another foundational classical writing, the Taishan Laojun Naiguanjing.
Okay.
This text lays out the energetic roles of the universe, stating simply, heaven is the father, earth is the mother.
Heaven and earth. Let's really explore what those symbols mean in classical Chinese philosophy. Because if we don't understand the metaphor, the treatment won't make any sense.
Right. It requires understanding the classical energetic view of the earth. What is the earth's role?
To hold things up.
Symbolically and energetically, the earth's place is to be at the lowest possible point. It lies beneath everything. It bears the weight of the mountains, it supports the roots of the trees, it absorbs the water, and most importantly, it nurtures every single living thing upon it without any discrimination, ego, or argument.
It doesn't dominate.
Exactly, it doesn't dominate. It supports.
It is the ultimate foundational, quiet, nurturing force.
Yeah.
It holds everything up without making a sound.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with heaven, or the sky, which is active, stormy, loud, and dynamic.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Therefore, a dominant, fierce, argumentative mother who monopolizes control of the family has, according to this philosophy, inverted heaven and earth.
She inverted them.
She has abandoned the supportive role of the earth and tried to become the stormy sky. She has completely upended the natural, peaceful, energetic flow of the family unit.
And the child's autism, their decision to lock their heart door, is just a symptom of that cosmic inversion. The child couldn't survive the storm, so they built a bunker.
Precisely. So the treatment isn't about teaching the child to speak, it's about calming the storm.
Wow.
It's a ritual of profound energetic realignment. The text outlines a very specific multi-step process for the mother.
What's the first step?
First, she must hold a private family gathering. And crucially, the text specifies this must be done without the autistic child present.
Why without the child?
Because the child's energy is already too sensitive. The mother must stand before her husband and her extended family and openly confess her dominance.
Wow.
She has to verbally strip away her ego and own the absolute fact that her fierce behavior created the hostile energetic environment that forced her child into silence.
That sounds emotionally agonizing.
Yeah.
To stand before your family weeping and basically take the cosmic blame for your child's condition, it's an ultimate act of humility.
It requires immense vulnerability and the total destruction of her ego, yes. But the ritual doesn't stop at the family living room.
There's more.
After the confession, she must take it to the spiritual level. She must go to the family ancestors' graves or to the top of a mountain and read a very specific formal repentance text directly to heaven and earth.
A formal apology to the universe.
Yes. She must ask for forgiveness for inverting the natural order. She must vow to permanently surrender her dominance, to stop arguing, and to actively embody the quiet, supportive energy of the earth moving forward.
And the theory is that this ritual, this complete destruction of the mother's dominant ego, somehow cures the child.
The claim made in the text is that once the mother genuinely, authentically realigns her energy, once she truly lowers herself to become the support of Earth, the child will instantly feel it.
Because they're connected.
Remember, they are still energetically synchronized. The child's internal radar will realize that the fierce, stormy environment that necessitated the silence strategy is gone.
The threat level has returned to zero.
Exactly. Therefore, because the threat is gone, the child's corresponding behavioral pattern will begin to soften. The locked heart door will slowly unlatch, and the child will naturally heal and begin to interact with the world again.
It's exactly like your smartphone analogy earlier. If you turn off the hostile, dominant Wi-Fi signal, the child's internal software realizes it doesn't need the firewall anymore, and it just drops the defenses.
That's a perfect modern translation of the classical mechanics. The text does note one very strict limitation, however.
Okay, what is it?
It warns that this energetic resetting only works effectively before the child turns 16.
Why 16?
Because after 16, the behavioral patterns that were drafted in the womb become too deeply ingrained in the child's own independent adult energy field.
Oh, I see.
They aren't just reacting to the mother anymore. The silence has become their own permanent nature. At that point, it cannot be easily reversed just by the mother repenting and changing her state.
If we really step back and look at the architecture of this entire system, I mean, how does this framework view the overarching concept of cause and effect?
That's a great question.
Because so much of this, the fortune, maternal behavior, the fetal response, it sounds a lot like karma. But it doesn't sound like the westernized pop culture version of karma where, you do bad things so the universe punishes you with a bad event.
That is a vital distinction to make. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely redefines how we should understand karma within the context of these classical texts.
Right.
Karma, as it is used here, is not magical retribution. It isn't some cosmic judge sitting on a cloud punishing a dominant mother by striking her child mute.
Then how does the text actually define it? What are the mechanics of karma here?
The text explicitly defines karma simply as patterns of thought and behavior. It is a completely neutral equation.
Neutral equation.
Yeah. The fetus arrives with a specific potential or instinct. For example, the male tendency to withdraw. That is the karma, the pattern.
Okay.
That pattern then meets a specific environmental condition, in this case, the mother's overwhelming dominant energy in the womb.
Right.
And when that specific pattern meets that specific condition, it produces a guaranteed result, which is the disease, the locked heart door.
It's a chemical reaction.
It is pure metaphysical chemistry. If the mother wasn't dominant, the male fetus's tendency to withdraw wouldn't have been triggered, and the result wouldn't happen.
Exactly.
If the fetus was female, the dominant condition would trigger a different reaction entirely. It is pure cause and effect, mapped out not on a spreadsheet, but on a spiritual and psychological level.
It is genuinely astonishing how meticulously constructed and internally consistent this worldview is.
It really is.
We've spent this entire deep dive unpacking an incredibly complex, highly alternative paradigm. And in this system, autism is absolutely not a missing gene, it's not a broken brain, and it's not a developmental failure.
Not at all.
It is viewed as an active, brilliant, strategic, fetal response to family dynamics. It is deeply, inextricably intertwined with classical gender roles, the socioeconomic status of the family, and this vast spiritual cosmology of heaven, earth, and energetic synchronization.
It challenges the very bedrock of how modern society views disease and neurodivergence. It places the origin of our deepest behaviors not in our biology, but in the intersection of our mother's emotional state and our own embryonic psychological choices.
And to you listening, whether you agree with a single word of this, whether you think it's a profound spiritual truth or entirely metaphorical poetry, it absolutely forces you to look at the concept of nature versus nurture in a completely different light.
It absolutely does.
It asks us to consider how unimaginably sensitive the developmental process truly is, and how profoundly connected we are to the emotional environments that shape us before we even take our first breath.
It certainly does. And reading through these sources, understanding the intricate mechanics of how a fetus supposedly drafts its defenses, it leaves us with a profound philosophical puzzle to mull over.
How depth?
If this framework argues that our deepest, most locked-in behavioral traits, the very things that define how we argue, how we love, and how we communicate with the world, are actually just coping mechanisms we drafted to survive our mothers before we were even born, it raises an important question for all of us to consider.
What's that?
How much of what you consider to be your true personality today is actually just a survival strategy you adopted before you ever saw the outside world?